This week's topic is handover analysis. So it is a conversation we have quite often, but the main reason this conversation comes up as often as it does is it's often the question that people are trying to get their heads around when they are using UPN, having come from using swim lanes quite a lot. So there's sort of two different questions we get asked when people are looking for swim lanes. One is when I look at a swim lane, I can look at the lane that a particular person's involved in and just see what they do. The other question which we've always, or certainly I've always found more interesting, is when I lay a process out in swim lanes, I can clearly see the handovers from one swim lane to another. Now, as I've had earlier this week with somebody looking at some swim lane diagrams, it turns out it's not as easy as one might think it is to see the handovers, because in the example we were looking at on Monday, I think it was, there were actually handovers in the process, but they hadn't been clearly they had, because they couldn't fit the box into two swim lanes, or they had decided they couldn't fit the box into two swim lanes at once. They'd picked one of them, and it turned out that another one was actually creating a handover they couldn't see on the diagram. So although visually it does give you that ability to see where the line crosses from one swim lane to another, it's not perfect, and obviously no approach is. But why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because, and I think most of you, if not all on the call, will probably agree that when you're looking at processes, the handovers typically between teams and departments, but even within teams and departments, handovers are one of the most common places that processes go wrong. And so often when you're doing a piece of process improvement work, actually looking at evaluating and trying to remove handovers in a process is often a good way to quickly identify and remove some of the issues that you might come across in a process. Now, I started that by saying it's sort of typically between teams and departments, and the reason I said that is that's often where you get that sort of siloed thinking, where a team is working together, they do their thing, and then they chuck a piece of work over the fence to another team and let them get on with it. But actually, in my experience, quite a lot of workshops I've done over the years have resulted in two people who are in the same team, often sit next to each other in the office, have probably worked together for many years, and in mapping the process and looking at what outputs they have from one activity into another is when they'll often realize that they've got a handover problem between themselves. So I'm sure I know there's a number of you on the call here that I've worked with in the past who will be familiar with comments in workshops, like two people who sit next to each other going, "Oh, that's what you do. I never realized." Another one that I've heard is when someone says, "Oh, and then I hand this document, or I fill the form in and I hand it to Colin," and then Colin says, "Yes, you do, but you're using the wrong version of the form, and you don't put all the information that I need, so I have to go and rework the information." So it can happen at a role by role level. So what I want to do today's session, I don't think it will take too long, but I just want to take you through, refamiliarize some of you with some of the tools that we have built into Spark, which can help us start to focus in and identify where potential handovers are in the process. And then I want to also take you through something that one of our users started doing at the end of last year and showed to us at the beginning of this year, a way that they're using one of the features in Spark to actually capture and monitor handover points. So let me take you into Spark itself. So I've got a couple of example processes. So this is going to be less about the processes themselves, but I just wanted to pick some examples that had enough content in to demonstrate some of the principles. The first one I've got here is a hire to retire process. So what I've got on the the screen at the moment is a very high level view of an end-to-end hire to retire process. But just before I go into some of the features, I know I just mentioned this before, but one of the powerful things about UPN is the fact that we highly recommend this concept of every activity having an input and an output, because often, as I was just outlining in the examples that I've had many times in workshops, it's actually when you are discussing the outputs with the stakeholders and the subject matter experts that you flag up and identify and discuss the problems that happen in handovers. And I know early on in my career using this approach, I didn't realize that was what was happening. Like we would be in a discussion, we'd talk about a problem as a result of talking about an output from an activity. We document it as an issue, and we'd go and try and resolve that at some point and to fix it. And it never occurred to me, I didn't stop and think, actually we're fixing a bunch of handovers or removing the handovers or whatever, because it was sort of happening naturally as part of the discussion. So as I said, just wanted to kind of remind everybody about that power is inherent within the UPN approach. So just by documenting your process using UPN, you'll often find the handover points. This is not the best example, I realize, because it's the same role on every single box on the example I've got, but we'll see some other examples in a second. So what we're trying to do then is we're trying to understand what some of the potential challenges are when work or information or data is passing from one person to another, or one team or one department to another. So one of the tools that you've got available to you in doing this, beyond the outputs I've just talked about, is you can simply look at the roles report that you get within Spark as a result of mapping the process. So if you go down to the business tools and then open up roles, hopefully most of you will be familiar with this, but as soon as you open up roles, now a couple of things. One, I've opened the business tools from within the hire to retire process, so you have to just remember that when you open business tools, so any of the reports, the quantify, the analytics, when you open that from within a process, it will filter specifically on that process. If you want to run the same reports and analytics across multiple processes, you have to go back to the workspace level and run it from there and set your scope. When you open the roles manager, you get the overview page by default, and it shows you all the roles that are used in this particular process. And the first chart it shows you is how often each of those roles appear in the process. So it gives you a very sort of simple overview as well, but it might give you some indication of where you want to start looking. For example, where you've got the sort of highest number of roles, you might want to start looking at how they interact with different people. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick this HR manager one here. So if I want to actually open up the HR manager's role, we have a list all the way down the side of the screen there of all the roles. You can actually filter on the roles as well. So I could click on this and filter which one I want, but the HR manager is there, easy to see. So I'm going to open that up. So when you click on click on any role, sorry, it gives you a role description, all the usual stuff, how many boxes that role sits against, and lots of other information. Now, if I just scroll down, so first thing it shows you here is which activities in the process this role is associated with. You'll see it just summarizes the number of activities. It does give you an option to expand that to show you all of the activities that role is involved in. But the one I want to show you here is this section called interactions with other roles. And what this is doing here is it's simply looking at which roles sit on boxes that are either the same box as the current role is sitting in. So that's the central column here, which we call collaborators. So the idea is this is every time where there's an activity in a process, and in this case our HR manager is on the same box as the line manager. So we call that collaborators because it normally indicates that they are working together on the same activity. And then what we also do is we also pull out the suppliers and customers columns as well. So now that you'll often see the same roles on both sides, but basically what we're doing with the suppliers column is we look at every time there's a box with the HR manager on it, we look at any boxes that are activities that are inputting into that, and we look at which roles are on there and how many times. So you see the line manager there as appears twice. So there's two activities where the line manager is handing something to the HR manager. In this case, there's one activity where HR administrator is handing something to the HR manager, and again two here where the business manager is handing something to the HR manager. And then the customers column is the flip side of that, so that's the activities that are outputting from the current one that the HR manager is looking at. Now, so this isn't telling you the specific handover points, but what it's giving you is an indication of how often this particular role is handing over to another, and how many different roles they are handing over. So again, this gets generated automatically. It's always worth just having a quick look at it when you're doing some sort of work, because again, if you're looking at other things we could do to minimize the number of handovers, then you want to come in here and start looking at the numbers. Are we talking about 10, 20, even more handovers within there, which might seem odd? Essentially what I'd look out for is outliers. So here I'm sort of talking about 1 or 2 handovers. 3 is the highest, but it's not an outlier. As I said, if that was sort of 10, 15, then I'd be going, okay, that's a bit strange, and we'd want to potentially look at that. The other thing that I find really useful with this report to look at, now this isn't a great example of it, but I do see this in a lot of processes, is where you'll get one role like a HR manager, for example, and then the list of suppliers and customers is really long. You get like 20 roles on it. Now, again, that's indicating a high number of handovers, but not just a high number of handovers, a high number of handovers with different people in the organization. And again, you start to get a sense of, are they people in the same team? Are they people in different teams, and so on? So it's really useful, because it might be that actually you want to remove or reduce the number of handovers, or actually it's important that the role that you're looking at is a key role that is communicating with lots of different people. So if you're thinking about the skills that person might need to have in that role, it gives you that indication that you're going to need someone who's an excellent communicator, can manage stakeholders, all of that sort of thing. So it's not directly about the specific handovers that happen, but it's all of the things you need to think about that go around handovers and the impact of handovers within your process. So again, that's a really useful tool to use. Now, I'm going to show you something here. This is a tool that I use quite a lot in Spark, but I don't use it from this particular page, but I'm going to show you because I don't know why I haven't used it from this page before, but it's quite cool. Now, if I scroll up to the top of my role description, there is a button there that says highlight role. And so if I click on that, what that's going to do is, we'll see in a second, is that it's going to highlight this role on the process diagrams. So I'm going to use the little navigator here to click through to the process. And when I come through, so it's highlighting the particular step that I'm on. But what it's done for me is enable the highlighter tool. So I don't know if, again, not sure if you're all familiar with the highlighter tool, but the highlighter tool allows you to highlight different things. I'll show you how to turn it on from here in a second. But you'll see, as well as the box that I've clicked through on is highlighted, there is a yellow kind of outline or shadow around the box, and then everything else is grayed out, so it's helping to pull my eye towards this box. Now, what's neat about this is if I go back up to the top level of the hire to retire process, what it shows me is So the HR manager doesn't exist on this particular level, but it is highlighting the detailed views. So it's telling me that there is a HR manager down below. So I click on that, it takes me down there. Similarly, if I go to the other one, again, it highlights the boxes. And again, so that's quite a nice way of going and quickly looking. And again, what it's doing by highlighting in this way, it's answering that first question about the swim lanes. Okay, so I want to just see the steps that a particular role does, so it helps to do that. But in doing so, by not eliminating the rest of the diagram, it is then, you can then clearly see where handovers are happening from other parts in the process. So again, it's helping you to focus in and see where potential handovers are happening. Now, let me just quickly show you the highlight tool. If you're not familiar with it, normally you would activate it from, or normally I activate it here from within the process diagram itself. So you click on, it's on the left menu, it's called the highlighter tool. And when you come in here, you can actually highlight by different things. So I've obviously gone in roles and I'm using the highlighting a specific role. You can see you can highlight other things like systems or custom fields or forms and so on. So it's really, really flexible, really nice way of just sort of highlighting specific steps in the process. Just one thing though, it works best when you're doing one role at a time. If I were to, for example, highlight the HR administrator as well in this case, you'll see it's not going to differentiate between the two roles that I've highlighted. It's just highlighting everything the same. So just be aware of that. But as I said, it's another one of those tools that helps you to quickly identify where potential handovers might exist in the process. So the last thing I want to take you through, so as I said, just showing you some of the tools that are available. And then last thing I want to take you through is something that, as I said, one of our users showed us they were doing at the beginning of this year, which has proved to be quite popular with some of the other teams that I've shared this with. Now, this particular organization, what they've been doing, or what they do, is they go into to companies and they have a sort of methodology they go through and looking at different issues within processes. And one of the key things they do is look at handovers. So going back to the point I was making before about the UPN approach, forcing you to have that conversation at the point in time where you're documenting the process. So while you're talking about the outputs, it's helping you highlight the particular handover point. They were actually using custom fields to capture what the issue was, but they were doing it on the Y box rather than on the activity. So they were attaching the custom field to that. And then what they started to do was, through doing that, they started to then use the grouping in the custom field to actually highlight different types of handover. So let me just take a Y box here and show you an example. So they created a custom field called handover. And as I said, initially what they were doing is they were just describing what the issue with the handover was. And one of the reasons they were doing that initially, sorry, just to go back on, was that they wanted to be able to run a report just to show the customer how many handovers they had in a particular process. So initially it was like, we just want to tag the Y boxes so we can count the number of handovers. Then they started describing what the issue was in it, so they had that richer piece of information. But then they had a slightly different version of this, but it was kind of similar. But then using the grouping to go, okay, let's then categorize the different types of handovers that we're looking at. And so it could be on a departmental level, it could be teams within departments from one team to another, or role level, or the other example I had there is external. So are you handing something over to somebody outside the organization or receiving something from somebody outside the organization? So again, one of the benefits of it is you can run reports that kind of show you what all the Y boxes with the handovers. You can count the number of handovers in there. But then the other thing is, if you've used the categorization, and you saw there in my grouping, I've also colored the groupings different colors, when you do that, you can still use the form's visibility. Now, there is a little bit of a real estate issue on my example here, but when you open it up, you can then visually see on the process diagrams where different handovers are and different types of handovers. So again, it's a nice way of, this will be in the reports as well. So when you run the reports, you can see what the level of the handover is as well. So it's again another way of sort of highlighting what those handovers are and then deciding what to do about it.